Who are these attackers? From the individual level to the group level, psychologically speaking, what's their motivation? Is it purely money? Is it the challenge? Are they malevolent? Is it power? These are big philosophical human questions, I guess.
So these are the questions I set out to answer for my book. I wanted to know, are these people that are just after money? You know, if they're just after money, how do they sleep at night, not knowing whether that zero-day exploit they just sold to a broker is being used to basically make someone's life a living hell? And what I found was there's kind of this long sordid history to this question. It started out in the 80s and 90s when hackers were just finding holes and bugs in software for curiosity's sake, really as a hobby. And some of them would go to the tech companies like Microsoft or Sun Microsystems at the time, or Oracle. And they'd say, hey, I just found this zero day in your software and I can use it to break into NASA. And the general response at the time wasn't, thank you so much for pointing out this flaw in our software. We'll get it fixed as soon as possible. It was, don't ever poke around our software ever again, or we'll stick our general counsel on you. And that was really sort of the common thread for years. And so hackers who set out to do the right thing were basically told to shut up and stop doing what you're doing. And what happened next was they basically started trading this information online. Now, when you go back and interview people from those early days, they all tell a very similar story, which is they're curious, they're tinkerers. They remind me of like the kid down the block that was constantly poking around the hood of his dad's car. They just couldn't help themselves. They wanted to figure out how a system is designed and how they could potentially exploit it for some other purpose. It doesn't have to be good or bad. But they were basically kind of beat down for so long by these big tech companies that they started just silently trading them with other hackers. And that's how you got these really heated debates in the 90s about disclosure. Should you just dump these things online because any script kiddie can pick them up and use it for all kinds of mischief? But don't you want to just stick a middle finger to all these companies that are basically threatening you all the time? So there was this really interesting dynamic at play. And what I learned in the course of doing my book was that government agencies and their contractors sort of tapped into that frustration and that resentment. And they started quietly reaching out to hackers on these forums. And they said, hey, that zero day you just dropped online, could you come up with something custom for me? And I'll pay you 6 figures for it so long as you shut up and never tell anyone that I paid you for this. And that's what happened. So throughout the 90s, there was a bunch of boutique contractors that started reaching out to hackers on these forums and saying, hey, I'll pay you 6 figures for that bug you were trying to get Microsoft to fix for free. And sort of so catalyzed this market where governments and their intermediaries started reaching out to these hackers and buying their bugs for free. And in those early days, I think a lot of it was just for quiet counterintelligence, traditional espionage. But as we started baking the software, Windows software, Schneider Electric, Siemens industrial software, into our nuclear plants and our factories and our power grid and our petrochemical facilities and our pipelines, those same zero days came to be just as valuable for sabotage and war planning.
Does the fact that the market sprung up and you can now make a lot of money change the nature of the attackers that came to the table, or grow the number of attackers? I mean, what is, I guess, you told the psychology of the hackers in the 90s. What is the culture today, and where's it heading?
So I think there are people who will tell you they would never sell a zero day to a zero day broker or a government. One, because they don't know how it's going to get used when they throw it over the fence. Most of these get rolled into classified programs and you don't know how they get used. If you sell it to a zero-day broker, you don't even know which nation state might use it, or potentially which criminal group might use it if you sell it on the dark web. The other thing that they say is that they want to be able to sleep at night.
Right.
And they'd lose a lot of sleep if they found out their 0-day was being used to, make a dissident's life living hell. But there are a lot of people, good people, who also say, no, this is not my problem. This is the technology company's problem. If they weren't writing new bugs into their software every day, then there wouldn't be a market. Then there wouldn't be a problem. But they continue to write bugs into their software all the time, and they continue to profit off that software. So why shouldn't I profit off my labor too? And one of the things that has happened, which is, I think, a positive development over the last 10 years, are bug bounty programs. Companies like Google and Facebook, and then Microsoft, and finally Apple, which resisted it for a really long time, have said, okay, we are going to shift our perspective about hackers. We're no longer going to treat them as the enemy here. We're going to start paying them for what it's essentially free quality assurance. Mm-hmm. And we're going to pay them good money in some cases, 6 figures in some cases. We're never going to be able to bid against a 0-day broker who sells to government agencies, but we can reward them and hopefully get that bug earlier where we can neutralize it, so that they don't have to spend another year developing the 0-day exploit. And in that way, we can keep our software more secure. But every week I get messages from some hacker that says, I tried to see this 0-day exploit that was just found in the wild, being used by this nation state. I tried to tell Microsoft about this 2 years ago, and they were going to pay me peanuts, so it never got fixed. There are all sorts of those stories that can continue on. And, I think just generally, hackers are not very good at diplomacy. They tend to be pretty snipey, technical crowd, and very philosophical in my experience. But, diplomacy is not their strong suit.
Oh, there almost has to be a broker between companies and hackers, where you can translate effectively, just like you have a 0-day broker between governments and hackers.
Yeah.
Because you have to speak their language.
Yeah. And there have been some of those companies who've risen up to meet that demand. And HackerOne is one of them. BugCrowd is another. Synac has an interesting model. So that's a company that you pay for a private bug bounty program, essentially. So you pay this company, they tap hackers all over the world to come hack your software, hack your system. And then they'll quietly tell you what they found. And I think that's a really positive development. And actually, the Department of Defense hired all 3 of those companies I just mentioned to help secure their systems. Now, I think they're still a little timid in terms of letting those hackers into the really sensitive, high-side classified stuff. But, baby steps.
Just to understand what you were saying, you think it's impossible for companies to financially compete with the 0-day brokers, with governments. So like the defense can't outpay the hackers.
It's interesting, they shouldn't outpay them, because what would happen if they started offering $2.5 million at Apple for any, 0-day exploit that governments would pay that much for, is their own engineers would say, why the hell am I working, for less than that and doing my 9 to 5 every day? So you would create a perverse incentive. And I didn't think about that until I started this research, and I realized, okay, yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to incentivize offense so much that it's to your own detriment. And so I think what they have, though, what the companies have on government agencies is, if they pay you, you get to talk about it. You get the street cred.
Yes.
You get to brag about the fact you just found that $2.5 million, iOS 0-day that no one else did. And if you sell it to a broker, you never get to talk about it. And I think that really does eat at people.